Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that your day is going beautiful. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing, and I hope the wind is at your back. We have an incredible show for you today. It's one we tried to start last week, but we're back with an incredible guest. Let me just go ahead and drop this intro on everybody. I would like to introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, the illustrious Donald Summers, a man whose wit is as sharp as his business acumen. As a speaker, author, and social entrepreneur extraordinaire, Donald has navigated the tumultuous seas of altruism with a compass firmly pointed towards success. With the finesse of a seasoned captain, Donald founded Altruist Partners in 2006, a beacon of hope for nonprofits and social enterprises seeking guidance amidst the tempest of ambition. From the verdant forests of Seattle to the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., and the fog-kissed alleys of London, Altruist has unfurled its sails to aid organizations in charting a course towards lofty goals. With a knack for turning dreams into reality, Donald has led his clients to astonishing heights, boasting growth rates that would make even the most seasoned financiers do a double take, with a median annual growth of 25% and a return on fees that could rival the treasures of ancient mariners. Donald's prowess in the realm of altruism knows no bounds. A graduate of Middlebury College and Harvard University, Donald is not just a master navigator of the social sector, but a learned scholar whose essays and commentary have graced the pages of esteemed publications such as the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Harvard Magazine, and the Stanford Social Innovation Review. So raise your sails and set your course towards greatness, for in the company of Donald Summers, the journey towards a better world is as enlightening as it is entertaining. Donald, thanks for being here today. How are you?
Thank you, George. I hope I can fulfill a small fraction of your generous introduction today. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. I like to set the bar high because I think that in the book Scaling Altruism, a proven pathway for accelerating nonprofit growth and impact is what we're going to get into today. But before we start diving into the nuances a little bit, I was kind of hoping you could unpack who you were before you became who you are today.
Thanks. When I write about this in the book, I grew up suspicious of business and really unhappy and frightened about what finance capitalism was doing to the world, oppressing people, driving our ecosystem to the brink, you name it. I studied art, literature, religion. I was very idealistic in college, and it took me years to find my pathway. I started teaching, and then I ended up in graduate school. It wasn't until the age 28, I ended up in a principal certification coursework in graduate school. And they said, hey, if you're going to run a school, if you want to be a teacher and really help address inequality, you also need to learn business. You need to learn finance. You need to learn law. You need to learn accounting. And I went in dreading this stuff, like, oh my God, this is terrible. And then when I got into the classes, I had an incredible enlightening, an epiphany. What if we could use these tools for good? I loved accounting. I loved the, understanding how the world works. And, many years later, when I heard Bono, the U2 lead singer, who founded a major initiative to fight AIDS and poverty in Africa, said, finance capitalism isn't immoral. It is amoral. You can use these tools for good. That was the founding of the start of my career as a nonprofit fundraiser, and then an executive, and then a foundation CEO, and finally a consultant. I've been using a business playbook, an entrepreneurial playbook, in a space that is suspicious of business principles, rightly so, that doesn't learn these practices because they're taught in business schools, not colleges of education, not colleges of social work, not schools of public policy. So we're trying to take the best from the private sector and merge it with the big hearts and the wonderful people of the social sector, and scale altruism. That's the origin story. I'm happy to unpack that, but it's been very difficult journey of discovery and trying to bring these two worlds together for social good.
It's fascinating. It reminds me of the hero's journey in some ways. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell and mythology. And, in the beginning, in the introduction, we talk about some pretty big numbers, like growth rates of 25% and, huge returns on things. And you talk about making this transfer from the business world and learning all these things. But that sounds to me, and I think you quote in the book, that there's this transition from sort of a bravado, sort of an arrogance, into humility. And I was wondering if you could talk about that's probably first hard to talk about. You got to get to it. You got to understand, you got to own it. But maybe you could speak about that transition a little bit.
Oh, first of all, this is hard.
Without a doubt.
And I was when I got out of graduate school, I took a job as a fundraiser for an independent school that was using the what I call the traditional models of raising money: events, auctions, galas, writing letters. And when we used this business playbook, when we wrote business plans and engaged investors and really charted a much more sophisticated, powerful path, we took the school from raising a couple $100,000 a year to $5 million. And I repeated that success again for an organization that was working with the cognitively impaired. It was about to go out of business. It was losing $50,000 to $100,000 a year. We created a financial turnaround that generated $750,000 in 6 months. And today, the business unit that I founded for this organization has generated, over $50 million for the organization. I did it again at a major university. I did it again at a community college. And I was, 7-8 years into this fundraising enterprise, and I had hit every engagement out of the park.
Nice.
Right. And as I write about my book, it could, I now understand why. I was using a much more powerful toolkit than what was available. And I was really capturing some unrealized potential. But because I had the success as an individual, I thought I could just lead other clients to the same success. And my first two, when I founded my consulting firm, I also achieved great success with my first two clients. So as I write my book, I had all the arrogance of a nonprofit founder who sold her first startup to Google and made $1 zillion and could do no wrong. And early in my consulting career, I took this growth and impact methodology, as I would later call it. I'd bring this to nonprofits, say, you can grow, you can fulfill your most ambitious dreams of impact. This works, and I said, it's not hard. All you have to do is follow this. And what happened after that was a lot of failure. I was still delivering, benefit, but sometimes I'd get ejected like a virus from these organizations. I'd rub them the wrong way. I didn't understand. I didn't even know what change management meant. I didn't get the right traction with the board. I made all sorts of mistakes. And I was really, surprised and disappointed that, for the first time in my career, I was really confronting a lot of failure. And one of my early mentors said, you know what? Failure is just data to inform your strategy. Don't get upset. Because I was really traumatized. I'd never really confronted this professional failure before after years of being an impact agent. And he said, you have to take the emotion out of failure. You have to use that data and say, how can I fix this next time? So getting that mindset shift to like, failure isn't bad. Don't be embarrassed by it.
Right.
The best people fail. Right. Turns out that was the best thing that gave me humility. I really became to understand that first of all, growth for any type of organization is hard. Only 4% of for-profit businesses ever get to $1 million a year.
Wow.
So shed the arrogance that growing any company, for-profit, nonprofit, is easy. It's not easy. Just because I was successful, I was probably lucky. I was in the right place in the right time. Yeah, the methodology was good, but I was not ready for prime time. And it took me another 10 years of practice working with organizations around the world, succeeding sometimes, failing sometimes, but every time, as I write in the book, I was like, I'd paddle my little methodological rowboat. And sometimes I'd get to the other shore, sometimes I'd hit a rock and sink, right? And then I'd have to pull the boat out of the water, bail the water out, patch the boat. I had to make it a stronger methodology because I was merging, the entrepreneurial world and the business world with the social sector. And I was doing something very different. And I was also trying to do the entire organization, not just one issue. We weren't working on just fundraising or just board development or just program design or just execution. We were trying to do a complete organization-wide acceleration platform, which I hadn't seen anywhere before. So we were doing something hard. I was introducing a new thought process, new language, new terms, things like KPIs and business metrics and business intelligence and executive dashboard, introducing new concepts, financial projections into a space that wasn't used to it. Right. And I got comfortable with the failure, and it made me a better consultant, made me much more humble. It made me empathize with the difficulty of running an organization. Nonprofit leadership is extremely hard, just as for-profit leadership is. And ultimately, after 10 years, from 2006 to about 2016, was 10 years of repeated deployments with hundreds of organizations around the world, making things better. And that led finally after, I'd say about 10 years to some sort of stability. We finally had a process that worked. And, that led to a whole nother set of challenges that we can talk about. Once you have something that's good, then you have to figure out how to grow it. You have to scale it. And I've suffered many challenges and disappointments there too. So I went through a range of failures and error correction, not failures, but error correction with the methodology itself. And then a whole nother round of error correction on how to share it with all the nonprofits that would need it. So the last 20 years have just, as I tell people, it's an exercise in tenacity. You just have to believe in what you do, and you're going to get punched in the face, and you're going to have to wipe the blood off your nose and keep going.
I love it. It's like that old Mike Tyson quote that says, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right?
Yeah. And even these metaphors are uncomfortable in the social sector because it's all about being, even just using, being a CEO is like getting punched in the face. How many nonprofit CEOs use that? It's violent language, right?
Yeah.
But it's tough. So we try to, it's whenever you're trying to do something in a new way, right? That's called blue ocean. You're trying to create a new market. You're trying to do something. You're providing a product or service that no one has before.
Right.
And in the field of fundraising consulting, there's great people out there. They're subject matter experts in specific domains. They're good at governance. They're good at communications. They're good at marketing. They're good at fundraising. They might be good at, introducing efficiencies. But what I haven't seen is everyone bringing it all together in an order of operations. So that's been my own personal challenge. And I'm glad to say, I think we figured it out. And I'm glad to say, I think we figured out in a way to share it in a way that's high quality and also affordable and also, scalable so that anybody who's ready to go through this challenging work, it's not easy, it's hard, but the pathway to success is known. And at least we have a way to do that now. And that took about 20 years. But it's good, better late than never. And it's been an incredibly exciting journey. So again, thanks for the opportunity to dig into this with you today.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. And I love the way in which you shared your error correction, your failures, this walk from, batting 500 to, maybe striking out a few times. But it seems to me, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this, it seems like it's all necessary. Like you have to be the guy that is the best and then become the guy that's the lowest. And I think it echoes your idea of a neuro-balanced team. On some level, you have to play all the positions before you can thoroughly understand what makes someone great at that other position. Hey, this guy's really good as his EQ over here. This I know because I did it a little bit, but this guy's really good. Let's bring him on. Hey, this person over here, woo! Listen to the way in which they put these words together. It's beautiful. Bring them over here. But you were one of the first people in this book that I heard talk about this term neurobalance. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the strategy. Was it who you were that allowed you to see the people you need around you? Or maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Oh, like everything else, everything in the book I've discovered through trial and error. Right. And I didn't even understand. So let me take a step back. Anybody can be good at something.
Yeah.
Right. But you can't grow that. You can't share it. Like, if I want to combat climate change, I can plant a tree in my backyard. That makes an incremental contribution. But it's not significant until I can get many people to follow my example, and we can plant 1 billion trees or 10 billion. Same thing with social impact. There's all of these wonderful people out there with great ideas. They're programmatic experts, and they're delivering value, but in small amounts that are dwarfed by the size of the challenge. So then it becomes, how do we put teams of people together to take what they're doing, to take what we're doing, make it even better, and grow it to the many people or things or animals or places that need our work. And that requires a really sophisticated understanding of how people work together. Right? And this is where the nonprofit landscape has not done the work I would respectfully suggest that the for-profit sector has. The for-profit sector leaders are all about how I get teams of people performing well. There's a huge literature. It's what they teach in business school. It's what you learn on the job. There's consultants, all about teamwork, teamwork, teamwork. And that emphasis on teamwork and getting people to really come together it's not as strong, I would, again, respectfully argue, in the social space. And that's what this book is meant to address. One aspect of that teamwork is understanding that different people think differently, and there's thinking archetypes. And until we understand the neurological differences behind how we see the world, we can never build a successful team. And it's one of these many discoveries. And I know because I suffered from it myself. Because I have a neurological uniqueness that's like many people, but also different from many other people, and I have neurological deficits, I'm never going to run a successful organization until I fill those deficits with people who complement my strengths. And the person who first taught this to me was one of the executives of Bank of America back in the 80s and 90s. Again, I learned a lot of stuff from social sector leaders and private sector leaders. And he says, you need to read a book by Itzhak Adizes called Diagnosing Mismanagement. And you need to understand that people have 4 qualities. They can produce, they can create, they can administer, and then they can integrate people. And he says, until you put a team together, an executive leadership team that has all 4 of those capabilities, your organization is going to struggle. And I then went through my own exercise, was understood that, hey, I'm a great producer. I can get work done, and I'm an entrepreneur. I can create stuff. But I struggled with administration, and I really struggled with integration, building teams, right? I was kind of like that soul, that idealist who had a vision and wanted to work hard, but I didn't have the team building and the organizational capabilities. Lo and behold, that archetype is called a founder. That's what I am and what I do. But, now I understood, and now I understood from my clients that you have to have this visibility. And as you go through assessing organizations and figuring out what they need to have to accelerate, they should make sure that they have a neurobalanced leadership team. And here's the thing, this is one of many critical success factors. There's all these other ones too. It's confusing. What do you have to have? How do you separate the gotta haves? Like, you will fail unless you have this. How do you separate that from the nice to have of like, oh, you'll do better if you have this, but you'll be okay if you don't? around building teams around, it's this incredibly complex topic with how unique and crazy and wonderful humanity is. What does the literature say? What does the science say? How do you make sense of all of that? Leaders have to understand that whole body of knowledge around management and team building and execution, in addition to being subject matter experts around homelessness or education or healthcare or environmental conservation. You have to have both capabilities, that management, team building, organizational development expertise, and the subject expertise in your domain. And putting those two things together is very rare. And that's why we have people delivering great programs for a few people, but when they confront the difficulty of scaling it, you encounter this whole set of other things. So that's where that neurological piece comes into play. And I can talk a ton about the individual things, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had to have this, right? And it's not until you don't learn that stuff until you try it over and over and over again and fail, and then finally figure out, oh, here's this solution that I didn't know existed. And you got to constantly be. So anyhow, I'm still going through that process, right? Yeah. And that'll never end. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, the toolkit finally came together. But the neurobalance team is wonderful. And again, in the book, I give all leaders, like, don't just read the book, read the sources. Read Jim Collins' Good to Great and Great by Choice. Read 4 Disciplines of Execution, Chris McChesney and his co-authors. Incredibly powerful book. Read Yitzhak Adizi's. Understand the currents, the barriers in the space. You got to read Dan Pallotta. You got to read Ken Stern's book. Wonderful. Doshi and McGregor wrote this one book on roles. So we've also, my book brings together not just neurobalance teams, but all the other playbooks that we found to be most critical to moving organizations forward.
Yeah, the way the book is written, it's like a guidebook in a way. There's all these different sections you can go, and it's assess, align, plan, test, fund, and then execute. And in some ways, I feel like I was reading the Carl von Clausewitz of business management, because there's all these campaigns and like strategies in there. And I think it does speak to the idea of strategy versus grand strategy, which is thoroughly understanding, okay, is this particular ailment in society a symptom of the sickness that plagues us? And if so, how? Like, you get into the nuts and bolts of that. And I'm wondering, maybe you could share a story of when that clicked. Like, somewhere along the lines, you must have seen a piece of the puzzle click into the grand strategy. Can you share a story with us, like in the trenches when you began to see something like that happen?
Well, my favorite story is the one I tell in the book, and remains one. Just a moment I'll always be thankful for is I had the opportunity to partner with Janice Avery, the then CEO of Treehouse. Janice is a social worker by trade, and exactly the kind of person who matures into her field and launches an organization without formal business training. Mm-hmm. Because she recognized that in working with foster youth, they had so many things that they didn't enjoy that other children had, just because they lost the parent lottery, literally.
Right.
And so she started her organization to give these children a future and give them the support, supplement their lives. And my work with her really brought into bear, it was when the methodology came together. It was that aha moment when we finally figured out we had all the pieces of the puzzle. And one of them was I think the biggest piece was the one of the many epiphanies I had with that engagement with Janice was permission to be simple. People think that if something's effective only if it's complicated or fancy, right? And at the time, the organization was trying to improve graduation rates for foster children who were graduating only at 40%. 60% would drop out. They'd end up homeless, imprisoned, addicted, suicidal, terrible, unemployed, awful futures. And they brought in all these fancy people, sophisticated leaders from the Gates Foundation and PhDs in this and PhDs in that. And they designed this theory of change, this logic model. They were producing pages of documents. They were collecting 22 pages of data for every child they were looking at, right? How could that be wrong? We have the best minds in social impact. This organization spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to move the needle with all these fancy, brilliant people, right? And you know what they found? They didn't create a single percentage point of increase in graduation rates with all of this intellectual and monetary capital, right? And it wasn't, you know, the nonprofit sector often takes an academic approach. Well, you've got to have a research evidence. Mm-hmm. And what we brought in the engagement was a practical approach. Like, well, 22 pages of data, no one can read that. Your theory of change is way too complicated. All right. We can only keep a few things in our head at once. So what we've learned from the business world and the world of scaling is you've got to keep it simple and keep it focused. So we got rid of the 22 pages of data and replaced it with 4 pieces of data: attendance, behavior, coursework, and a broader element called psychosocial development, which we won't get into. But hey, if the kid misses school, if the kid gets a grade a D or F, or there's a disciplinary event, within 24 hours, we're going to come in there and give that child support, love, and a solution. All that other junk, throw it out, get rid of it. That transition from complex, fancy, academic, logic, this, social change, that, papers, studies, tossed it all out and said, we're going to focus on these pieces and orient everything that we do around this. We have to retrain people. We have to put the data system. We have to make sure that we're being consistent and focused. That turned out to be the programmatic change. Now, there was financial changes, there were staffing changes, there was improvements in governance. Many other things had to come together for this organization, but it was that keep it simple. Key performance indicator means you only have 4 or 5 of them. Focus on that. Get rid of all the other stuff. That when you have a ton of data, then everybody's version of truth can be the same. You don't have to have the hard conversations. You don't have to have the sacrificial discipline. Everyone can think what they want and be happy. You don't have to make sacrifices. Getting to that level of discipline, we're going to focus on just these things. That engagement, that's what really makes the difference between social interventions that work. They're focused and they're very, very disciplined. And again, the organization had to, I'll do one more thing and then I'll go for example. Even after the organization focused on those 4 KPIs, it took incredible courage to stay on target. Because now that we identified those measures, we had to collect those measurements and see if they resulted in changes in graduation rates and see if we could make it. For 12 months, we couldn't even collect the data because the difficulties of putting the data system in, the difficulties of retraining everybody, the difficulties of putting in the new technology. We were only working with 200 or 300 students, but it was a challenge to even execute. And then when we did get the indicators, we wanted to get 95% intervention rates, and we're only at like 13%. The numbers look really bad. So we identified the model, then the numbers were hard to correct, and then collect. And then when we did collect them, they looked bad. And most any other organization would be like, stop, cut our losses. This isn't going to work. We got to chase the next thing. Janice Avery showed the courage, the tenacity, and the commitment to say, this is going to work. We just need to keep on it. And slowly over time, and it took 2 to 3 years, the flywheel, as Jim Collins describes it, started to build. They started to prove that it could work, and they got the confidence, and then it actually grew. And within 5 years, the organization was driving graduation rates from 40% to over 80%. No
Wow.
one else in the world
Right.
had been able to move. This is the most challenged population, right? Foster children have some extreme levels of adverse childhood experiences that they've known. They don't have parents. They've often witnessed violence. There's drug and alcohol consumption. They're traumatized by a foster care system that puts them in multiple placements. They don't have anyone around who loves them. Their caregivers are often overloaded. These kids have the deck stacked against them, and to create a social intervention that puts them on the path to success was amazing. And then what blew me away, George, after we published the data, people are like, oh, that's nice. Oh, good for you. Good that Treehouse did it. And I'm like, there's 450,000 foster children in the United States. We're not all doing this right away. Right? I went to the Gates Foundation. Here's the model. Go do it. The apathy, it's, and I'm glad to say that now, this was back in 2012. And, I read last year that other states are finally picking up this model, right? And it's got the attention of the White House, and it's slowly getting traction, right? But this is the thing that still kills me, George.
Yeah.
We've got an intervention. Every child that graduates from high school versus one that drops out creates $1 million difference in public savings.
Right.
Because of reduced incarceration, reduced visits to the emergency room, reduced this. Graduating from high school versus not graduating from high school makes $1 million difference. And this model works with any kid, not just foster kid. It's simple. Get them in school, give them the help to get good grades, and support them so they don't have disciplinary challenges. Our entire public school could adopt this methodology and transform every land. No one looks at the data and goes, this will work. Now, if this intervention made lots of money, it would propagate across the marketplace in a heartbeat. But because it's creating social impact and the money it makes is actually saving, right? People aren't tuned into what's happening. We have all this, there's so much noise out there. Yep. So what I realized is not only do we have to make these changes, but we need to make a broader, we need to make the world, and particularly the United States, aware that social impact can actually make these dramatic changes, right? So I'm still, 15 years after the fact, when are people going to pick up on the ABC Plus model for helping vulnerable children graduate from high school? Because it's immediately adoptable by any school. It's low cost. It leverages the resources in the community. It's very simple to understand. It's been proven to work. So what's stopping you, right? And then, what's stopping us from being really much more curious and rigorous about all the other impact efforts that are out there? So this is a space where we need lots more work.
It's so mind-blowing to me to think about the way in which I hear I hear the word sacrifice, and to a lot of people that means giving up something. But in reality, it just means practicing first principles so that you'll be better later. You're not really giving up anything. You're creating a better life later. And I'm curious if it's this, like, what do you attribute this idea of people not wanting to? Is it that they are maybe a PhD, or that they have this model that they really want to work and they're promising quick results? Or is it a combination of all of these things? Like, what if there's the evidence and we've done the hard work and we've seen the numbers over time create this level of success and savings for people, like, what is the drawback? Like, when you go to the Gates Foundation, you're like, this model works. What are we doing? You guys care about people? Like, what is the drawback?
Well, people aren't wired for long-term outcomes. This is why we still have, it goes back to neurology and evolutionary psychology. And I've been struggling with this, and I get really intensely frustrated. Like, how come this didn't get picked up by the marketplace?
Right.
And then I have to remind myself, because we're not wired to think that way. Right. You remember, may rest in peace, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, just died. And he said, most people use mental shortcuts and biases, type 1 thinking. Type 2 thinking, slow analytical work. He said people avoid that at all costs because it's hard. right?
Right.
And then there's wonderful thinkings that talk about we're all wired for evolutionary status, right? And short-term
Right.
outcomes, right? Because if you didn't, kill the elk, you starve to death. No one's thinking, we're not wired for long-term thinking and results. So, you can bitch and moan all you want that we're not wired for success, or you're going to do something about it, right? And so I have to remember that the type of, and I think sacrifice is better replaced with the word investment.
Oh, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we call, we don't talk about, and I write about this in my book. Don't talk about gifts, talk about investments. Something that's you have to make an immediate investment of time, energy, money, and resources for an uncertain longer term payoff. And we know that people who succeed act that way. If you're stuck on short-term thinking, if you're chasing shiny objects and you're about immediate gratification, that dog doesn't hunt. You're gonna be in trouble. It's the people that know they've got to study something and get really good at it so they can compete later, that they go to school so they can graduate. The problem is when you grow up in trauma, right? And you grow up in constantly in adverse circumstances, it wires your brain away from that. You don't believe investment's possible. You have all these people in the upper classes criticizing those in poverty for their counterproductive behaviors. And if you put them through their same childhood trauma, they'd be acting the same way.
Right.
So how do we create the systems whereby we can bring everybody together? Hey, think type 2, not type 1, right? Invest in these types of things. It's a grand challenge. It's not just in my space. And the realization that the challenges the nonprofit sector faces, investing in leadership, creating disciplined planning, thinking long-term, setting a distant 5-year goal instead of what's our gala going to raise 6 months from now. I'd rather have them say, where do we need to be in 5 years and how do we get there? And what is the size of our problem demand how much we grow? That type of long-term, sophisticated, investment-oriented thinking, along with the tools to get there. Ultimately, we realize that this isn't for everyone, that it isn't easy, that only a small segment of the market is going to pick it up. Those that already have that willingness to do the investment. And, those people are in the most surprising places. You find them, I met a clinical psychologist operating in Harlem, delivering mental health services to those who can't afford it in her Harlem neighborhood. She's ready to go. She's joined our accelerator. She's off to the races. And she's running a tiny nonprofit of, $500,000 a year. And she knows she needs to be at 5 million in 2 to 3 years. And she's ready to take off. She doesn't join the fancy business accelerators or go to business schools, but those people are out there that are ready to do the hard work, that are ready to do the type 2 thinking, that are ready to invest, as long as they have something that's credible, that's shown to work. So I've gone from raging against the machine and, being pissed off that, the market isn't rushing to these known solutions, to saying, hey, this is hard. It's not for everybody. Let's build a community. Let's build a movement with the people who are ready for this, that are ready for the discipline, the investment, and who want to go big, who want to succeed, not just nibble around the edges of our social problems.
It's fascinating. It's an interesting way. It reminds me of, I think the name of the book was called like The Spider and the Starfish. And it talked about the idea of a centralized, entity versus like an extended entity. And it sounds to me when you're able to reach out into communities and find the people that thoroughly understand the problems in their community, then you have a real bridge to change. Then you really have a bridge to this, even though they may share some of the same symptoms of someone that grew up in poverty. This individual, like you were speaking about, they may have a unique understanding of the linguistic problems. You know what I mean by that? Like we have the same language, but sometimes we have like a different part of that language, like a pigeon of that language or something like that, that just really can narrow down and get down to the nuts and bolts of it, And I guess if I transfer to a question here, what pivotal shifts in nonprofit thinking inspired the development of scaling the altruism toolkit?
Well, again, it's been a journey. It's
Right.
been, 10 years of research and development, and it took me another 5 years to write the book, and we just followed what works. But if you look at the broad landscape, the nonprofit landscape, this is about 6 or 7% of our economy. It's a $2.5 trillion industry. And some nonprofits, like when people say, I tell people here in Seattle, there's a nonprofit that's a multi-billion-dollar corporation that earns in just gifts and grants $2 million every day of the calendar year. And say, do you know what that nonprofit is? It's incredibly high performing. It's one of the top institutions in its space in the world. And it's just a complete well-oiled machine for the most part. And they say, what is that nonprofit? Well, they say Gates Foundation? No. Gates Foundation doesn't earn any money. They're like a dragon sitting on a big bucket of money. They give out 5% at a time, right? They're not generating investment in partnerships. The answer is the University of Washington. A public university is one of the highest performing, and I worked there for 5 years raising money for them, and it's an incredible institution. It embodies the power of a nonprofit model. It can earn money, people give it money, it can create, it can get investments, it can spin off for-profits and nonprofits, and it changes the world. It's staffed with sophisticated executives who earn big. The university president makes $1 million a year, and boy, does she earn it.
Yeah.
Right? Nonprofits can be big and powerful. Hospitals and universities, known within the space as the eds and the meds, are generally large, sophisticated organizations that don't give anything up to any other private sector corporation, even though they're nonprofits, in terms of their sophistication, their impact, and their reach. What small nonprofits don't often realize, they conceive of themselves as something different. We call it the myth of uniqueness. That nonprofits think they're a different animal. They think they're unique. Because we call it confusing your tax status with your business model, right? Because I'm running a community college, you don't understand what we're doing because this is totally different. Because I'm running an animal shelter and you've helped, a juvenile foster care agency accelerate, you don't know anything about an animal shelter. We're a big environmental, organization driven by science, and, none of these practices apply. Everybody thinks that their own, and this is normal, everybody thinks their own challenges are unique, right? And the big realization that we hope that these nonprofit leaders can make is global sort of being hugely powerful and successful in solving problems like our universities. We have the best university system in the world, the best public university and the best private university system in the world by a mile. And we've got wonderful, despite what the news story says, our hospitals do incredible work despite the structural challenges that they encounter. These are effective organizations largely. And all smaller and mid-sized nonprofits can grow to be that big someday. And this is the other thing that's crazy, George.
Yeah.
We know that startup nonprofits can get big and influential. Wendy Kopp, as a woman my age, her senior thesis at Princeton was Teach for America. And now it's a $50 million a year nonprofit, bringing the best in, bringing great kids into these under-resourced communities. You have City Year, founded by a bunch of Harvard MBAs that are, giving low-income kids across the United States wonderful transformational experiences. KIP is another nonprofit startup. My friend Skelchim is got an incredibly powerful homeless services organization called Housing Connector. This is an organization that started up a few years ago, and they've already found houses for thousands of people, right? So what we're trying to do is establish that, first of all, just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you face unique organizational challenges. Your challenges are put high-performing teams together and grow your impact. Nonprofits have examples of work at scale already, hospitals, universities, right? there's success stories already where people, long before I ever got into the scene, started up a nonprofit, made it big and powerful. And it's this mindset, this culture of poverty, this fixed mindset, this zero-sum thinking that says we're a nonprofit, we're born to struggle, we're born to be a martyr, we face unique cultural constraints. This is why I cite Dan Pallotta's work in 2008 when he wrote the book Uncharitable. He talks about our inheritance from the Puritan, martyrdom. We can't, money's bad, we can't pay people, we have to sacrifice. It's often said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So most of the challenges come down to whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. Right. And what the work that still has to be done is to let these incredibly bold leaders know that a pathway to fulfilling your boldest dreams exists. Others have done it. It's rare. It's hard, but you don't take your current situation for granted. Don't keep doing the same things you're doing. For those that are courageous enough to try something different, the models exist, the pathway exists, and we just got to get into what the first practice in the book talks about is a growth mindset. That's the key change.
Yeah, there's so many great quotes that you put in the book, and one of them is growth and comfort can't coexist together.
Yeah, Ginny Romney, former head of IBM. All these people have solved it before.
Right.
This is hard, but the solutions are known, right? And this was my epiphany. It's like, wow, just no one's put, there's big management texts on running a nonprofit, but you don't know, they don't show you actually how to apply this abstract skill. Right. And then also they don't put it in the order. I talk about the order of operations is critical. Right. And this is about the extent of my math knowledge right here, about 5th grade. Right. Stop at PEDMAS. Right. You have, if you're going to solve an equation, you do the parentheses first, then the exponents, then the division, and so forth. Right. And if you can do the arithmetic right. But if you do it in the wrong order, you're going to get the wrong answer. And this was another major epiphany for me, because I would come in as a fundraiser for these organizations and start working on their fundraising when I realized that they had tons of work to do before they're even ready to accelerate. They had to align around a goal. They had to have a clear strategy. They had to have evidence-based interventions. They had to have, a plan, a scale. They had to have the right revenue strategy. They had to do the product market testing. They had to get the right team. They had to hire the right people. And that's, again, another organization is the order of operations. That's why the book goes through 7 phases, and it's numerically oriented into 50 practices. The first practice, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Don't even get to practice number 2 if any decision makers on your team or your board have fixed mindsets. They're stuck. They're not ready to change. They're not ready to grow. Stop. Right? And another thing I talk about in the leadership, unless you have an environment of psychological safety where people can bring bad news and not have it be encapsulated or suppressed, only organizations that understand that they can grow and that are ready to treat failure with a culture of inquiry, right? None of this other stuff will work without that. Those are deal killers. So how do you, so giving leaders a sense of, hey, do this first, and then this, and then this. And if you skip, you're going to get in trouble, because ask me how I know. Right?
Right.
Because I've tried to fast forward. I'm a very impatient person, and I've tried to fast forward to get organizations to the money. I did that for years, and sometimes I win, but then when I got my rear end kicked, right, and I failed, I said I got out of the order of operations. So it's not just the content, but you got to have it all, and you have to do it in the right way. And I think the book, we're finding out that people are able to read the book and it's helpful for them. I'm not going to be so arrogant to say that I finally got it all figured out, but I think it makes a contribution to not only the breadth of knowledge and the depth of knowledge, and having it being practical and ready to implement. Like, here's a template.
Yeah.
Here's an example from another successful nonprofit, how they wrote a business plan, how they did their revenue strategy. Here's a set of protocols for your database that you need to use if you're going to follow the system, right? Here's some other reading that you should do to have that resource rich, practical pathway like ready to go. It still doesn't replace having someone like me on your management team. That's the next challenge, is to figure out how to get organizations to not just understand that this exists, but how to help them through the adoption. And that's the stage of development we're in now.
The word meaningful comes to my mind, and you see it in startups with founders, and you see it in nonprofits. But somewhere along the line, it seems to me that the idea of what's meaningful and the idea of the mission, the do no evil, it loses its luster around short-term profits as things begin to mature. And I think in Steve Jobs' books, he talks about the way in which when the marketing team takes over, the true vision and the true progress of what the company or what the team or what the idea was moving towards begins to retract and lose its way a little bit. Maybe you could speak to that idea a little bit, the idea of meaningful and purpose.
Well, first of all, the meaning that you get in the nonprofit sector is what attracts so many brilliant people, so many committed people.
Agreed.
And I'm not the only one who, is scared of what's happening with, the direction of the world. And, particularly younger generations are growing up with the trauma of watching climate change happen and watching the unjustness of our various systems. So that meaning, that's first of all what the nonprofit sector, it's the problem solving machine. So how do we stay centered on that? Well, right now, most nonprofits, like most other for-profit organizations, they try to be mission-centered. Well, you write a mission statement. Okay, you write a mission statement. You get everybody in the organization to contribute. You have long meetings. You write a mission statement. Then what happens? Okay. Going to go back to the status quo, right? We plan and we put the thing in the drawer and then we go back. How do you execute on that mission statement to make sure that the entire organization succeeds, executes the mission? It's not just words on a paper or on a website. That's exactly what the darn book is about. You can have a mission statement. Mission statements say what you do. Vision statements say what success looks like when you're done. And so we say, if you have all the money in the world, and there's exercises in the book, I have all the money in the world, and I've spent it in the most brilliant strategy, and we've achieved total success. Describe your world in concrete terms. And get rid of the language around empowerment. Please don't use the word empowerment, right? Give me some specifics, right? The capital markets fund Black and Latina women entrepreneurs at the same rate as white men, right? I'm working with a client right now, Digital Undivided, that's trying to correct for the ridiculously, sad loss of opportunity because capital markets continue to funnel most startup money to white men and are overlooking all this talent. It's a business opportunity. It's a social injustice. So their vision is a very specific world that's measurable, right? So you take, and what their mission is, they train and fund and support Black and Latina women entrepreneurs. And the vision is a world where they're achieving success at parity. Then you need to pick a BHAG. What's your big, hairy, audacious goal within the next 5 years? Where are you going to be? We're going to take the women. We're going to go from serving X number of women to 10X. We're going to go from raising X amount of money to 10X that money. So the BHAG is a specific step towards that vision and towards that mission. And then you write a business plan around it. Then you fund it. And then you create an executive dashboard with all your key performance indicators. So where are we specifically now compared to the BHAG, which is a stepping stone to success? Making organizations mission-centered and keeping them mission-centered is about good planning and execution. It's about good management. It's about not letting documents end up in a drawer, on a drive somewhere, on a shelf. Everything is operationalized and transparent, and it's accountable, and everyone is accountable towards their piece in that. And you have to engineer all of that. and it's expensive and hard to engineer. So you have to only pick a few things. And if you're chasing new programs and, oh, we can get a grant for this, we can get a grant for that. Oh, it's kind of on mission. Oh, we can do this. Oh, that feels really good. Oh, I really don't want to have that hard conversation with you about these programs are actually different because I don't like conflict, and you can have, I can have mine, right? There's so many ways to get this wrong.
Yep.
Right. I often, speaking of quotes, my favorite quote is from an author, who's influenced my life deeply, and that, along with millions of other people, Leo Tolstoy. In the opening line of Anna Karenina, he says, all happy families are alike. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. So all organizations, I don't care what your tax status is, what your mission, they all tend to follow the same management practices and principles. They can have wildly different programs, but how people can plan, finance, and execute a difficult goal tends to be very well known. It's all documented in the literature. It's just all over the place. It's hard to find, right? And there's a million ways to screw it up. And every organization that screws it up in their own way. And believe me, I've been inside those organizations, and some I've fixed, some I haven't been able to fix. But really understanding that there is an orthodoxy of performance, that there's a clear pathway. That's the key piece.
Ah, that's brilliantly said. Reminds me, what happens when you fall off the horse? Speaking of Tolstoy, right?
Exactly. And all of this is, it's nice to boil it all down. Another favorite, and this is something too, and I'll talk about my own struggles. Going back to your first question, you have to marry the goal and date your strategies. So here's the most embarrassing and uncomfortable thing that I've experienced personally and professionally. And I want to go back to your original question, about what we've learned and what are the uncomfortable things. So I described many client engagements where I was just unsuccessful, right? Didn't engage the board and the goal, didn't have change management. Some clients I never should have even bothered working with because I failed to recognize there wasn't a growth mindset, right? I can't help you without a growth mindset. So all those mistakes. Once the process came together, like right about the time of Treehouse, like when we knew we could solve really hard social problems and win, then, what I was known in my book as impact strategy. I had figured out how to transform a nonprofit into a high growth, high impact organization. What I didn't have was a growth strategy. And, if I look at the marketplace of nonprofits, there's 1.4 million registered nonprofits with a median annual budget of 500,000. They all need to grow. Of that 1.4 million, there's probably 200,000 or 300,000 they're actually suited for this type of stuff. How do I go from serving 5 or 10 or 20 nonprofits a year to serving 5,000? Right? So this is eat my own dog food, right? And here's what was brutal, and I'm still getting over this trauma. I'm scaling up all these other organizations to beat the band. Hey, I can come in and, I can point to the bleachers and call the shot and crush it, right?
Right.
And here's your impact strategy. Here's your growth strategy. Here's the model. Boom. It's going to take us 6 to 9 months to learn this. We're going to raise a couple $1 million. And you're going to be a program leader, and we're going to 10x your impact, and you're going to be on your way to solving the problem. You could do that fairly consistently, right? But doctor, heal thyself. If I'm so good at this, how come I can't scale up the delivery of this methodology beyond the small basket of nonprofits brave enough to hire me, right? How do I get this out into the world to say this is something that everybody can adopt? How do I create the awareness? How do I create the operational capacity? Again, I can go back in my backyard and plant one tree. It's a hell of a lot easier. It's the same thing as planting 1 million trees, but it's a completely different challenge. So it was a constant source. And I tried since after the Treehouse win in 2013, I tried hiring people. I tried every strategy known that I could think of to try and scale up our own operations. And it failed. Fail. I go back to the metaphor, and I wrote a LinkedIn post about this a couple of weeks ago. I said, if you marry the goal and date the strategy, well, I had the impact strategy. I could help one nonprofit at a time or 10 nonprofits at a time. But my growth strategy, how could I scale up the delivery of services? Well, every strategy I dated for about 10 years sat down with me, listened to me for about 5 minutes, then threw its drink in my face and left the restaurant. Right? Like, you're done. Like, forget about it. I couldn't get it to work. I tried partnerships. I tried marketing. I tried inbounds. I hired dedicated salespeople. I published. I was blogged this, and zero. Right? But take each piece of, and I was embarrassed. It's like the doctor heal thyself. What's wrong with me? Cobbler's children have no shoes. I started to feel that, am I an imposter? Is there something wrong with me? And then again, I had to follow my own advice, which I realize is hard. Don't take it personally. Take the error correction. You have to stay at it, stay focused, keep trying new things. And what I realized what I needed to do was two things. I needed to launch an accelerator where I could work with large numbers of nonprofits at once, right? Launch that. Tried that. That didn't work. It was really hard to attract multiple nonprofits to start a rigorous training program at the same time and do it with high quality and low cost. I got a couple cohorts through it, but that didn't get any traction. And number two is I have to figure out how to make this methodology digestible. I had all these toolkits, all these presentations. I had to realize I had to write a damn book. Right? How do I put this enormity of everything that I've learned, this order of operations, all these practices, all these tools encompassing planning, governance, fund, program metrics, business intelligence, financial, how do I put it into one book? That took me 5 years. I went through 3 different editorial teams. I spent tens of thousands of dollars. It was brutal. I wouldn't wish that experience on my worst enemy. Thankfully, after the help of a developmental editing team at a small publisher called Bright Ray, I had a first draft. Then I developed that, got the partnership of Wiley, a top academic and business publisher, who connected me with an incredible editor called Angela Morrison. Anyhow, years of effort and developing the toolkit. I finally got the book done. And now that the book is done, I'm basically open sourcing our entire methodology. Other consultants can pick it up who might be subject matter expertise in one thing, and now they have the whole playbook. Nonprofit leaders can pick it up. I now have a playbook now where I can bring people onto a learning community and they can go at their own pace. In June or July of this year, we're going to relaunch the Altruist Accelerator. So anybody, even busy executives, they can pay $79 a month and join a nonprofit community. I have a nonprofit arm to my firm that's going to walk them through the book, how to learn the principles, apply the practices, get that peer support that they need, get a supportive community, get expert guidance, and walk them through a difficult journey of applying all these hard-earned, hard-won pieces of wisdom. And so easily it took 10, 15 years of figuring out the pathway of how to go from small groups to large groups, right? You get your growth, you get your impact, and then you have to figure out your growth strategy. Super hard. And I'm just pleased to say that, we're talking today because I'm making progress, right?
Yeah.
Not spiking the football. We're not even close to having the impact that we aspire to yet. But the takeaway from that is don't ever quit. Don't give up. And I've had to learn, we talk about humility and mistakes and difficulty. As I write in the book, I have calluses on my rear end from all the swift kicks in the butt I've taken, right? And it's taken years and years, but I truly believe in the transformational power of disciplined management to unleash this wave of social impact potential that these small to mid-sized organizations have. They just don't know exists. And now it does. So we'll see. I think this will work. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life pursuing this impact at scale.
Man, it's beautiful. It reminds me of that quote, like slow at first and then all at once. So the same way that like sometimes seeds attach themselves to your sock or your animal's fur, and then it spreads that seed wide, and then it grows there. But it sounds to me like you have people, this book is an invitation for people to do some, not only learning and understand the playbook, but to also come and ask questions. Like, it offers them a pathway back towards you. And in some ways, I'm wondering, do you think that perhaps this book and some of the ideas of the nonprofits like Treehouse, this is in a way merging the idea of nonprofit and forcing the profit world to start embracing a little bit more of the social responsibility?
Well, I wrote an article years back. It's still on our website about how the for and the nonprofit sectors are converging.
Okay.
Right. And there's a lot of obviously increased awareness among the for-profit community that their businesses aren't sustainable if they, burn our planet up beneath us. Right.
Sure.
So they're going to have to be more mission centered. Too much of this work has just been lipstick on a pig. Right? These businesses, oh, everyone's green and we're sustainable. And there isn't a business out there that doesn't have a sustainability statement, right? That doesn't have a carbon reduction platform. Much of it is BS.
Yeah.
Some companies are really making disciplined advances towards it. I love to cite, seventh generation Patagonia. These companies get, they end up being wildly popular because they actually share the values of their customers. People have strong BS detectors.
Yeah.
They know if companies are can sense if companies are trying to shine them on. So, but you've got the rise of what's known as ESG, environment, social, and governance reporting in the private sector. You have carbon trading markets, which we're heavily involved in. Finance capitalism is fixable. We can reform it. I do not sit with the group of people that say, burn it down, revolution, right? That's not going to get us anywhere. We just need to fix the tools that we have. So in some ways, I'm conservative that way, small c.
Right.
Let's fit, with good policy, with good laws, with strong regulation, like what's happening at the FCC. I love this thinker called Matt Stoller. He writes a blog called Big. And he can point to monopolization and the takeover of our marketplace by behemoths like Apple and Google and Amazon as being the cause of so much unemployment and misery. So yeah, we need to reform the for-profit space drastically. Nonprofits are like research and development for the for-profits. Nonprofits are where we experiment and where we come up with unique social problems. Yes, nonprofits can get really big, but they get big through partnership with governments and corporations too. When I talk about nonprofit scale, I'm talking about scaling influence. I'm helping a nonprofit right now called My Green Lab. They were founded by a neuro scientist who was really upset at the amount of waste and energy and water and pollution created by scientific research labs. Scientists are good people, right? And she said, hey, let's create a sustainability agenda where we can teach your lab how to reduce its carbon footprint, reduce its water consumption, and decrease pollution. And they hired us back in 2020, and now we're making a few changes where we can reach the entire multi-billion-dollar industry via a certification program. So you don't have to get huge. You don't have to turn your nonprofit into a corporate behemoth and make hundreds of billions of dollars. If you have things like certifications or corporate partnerships, or you can pass laws, you can experiment with something and show government the value of your experimentation. You might be able to have a civil advocacy campaign. So nonprofit scale happens in many creative, interesting ways. And I don't want your listeners to think that, oh, your nonprofit isn't big, isn't going to be successful until it's the size of a hospital or a university. Some need to get that big if they're involved with, if there's direct service that only they can do. But there's many ways to solve problems that are high leverage, that are high return on investment, that involve partnerships with governments and corporations. And it's ultimately, creating the type of teamwork and thinking outside of one's own assumptions and comfort zones that'll get you there.
It's really well said. I heard a great quote one time that said, when the instrument becomes institutionalized, it becomes corrupted. I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, when you think about like a good idea, you can have the science around, carbon sequester, you can have the science around sustainability, but quite often it becomes company science. Like, how does a nonprofit protect themselves from being cannibalized from this great scientific thing to the company science idea of, if we take sustainability, for example, what does that mean? And how can a multi-level, or how can a multinational corporation claim to be sustainable when their whole business model is built on excess consumption? You know what I mean?
It's a great one. We call them perverse incentives.
Well said. Okay, let me write that.
Yep. The amount of broken promises in the nonprofit space are the same as the broken promises in the for-profit space. Promises are easy to make and hard to keep. How do you not break your promise? There's terrible stories of nonprofits breaking promises, right? All you got to do is Google ProPublica's stories on the Red Cross. Follow. So, people think, oh, all you need to do is get a business leader in there and you can, turn a nonprofit around. Well, the Red Cross hired Gail McGovern, who brought in an entire management team from AT&T a long time ago for the Red Cross. And ProPublica, an independent news, very, very well-regarded, award-winning, independent, they do muckraking journalism. This is ProPublica saying this, not me. And I'm speaking to the Red Cross attorneys who might want to intimidate me for saying this. But she has done, according to ProPublica, incredible damage to that organization. They have lied before Congress. She said, after the hurricane in Haiti, that they built $6 million home, 6 million homes, or some statistic to that effect. They'd only built 6. I mean, getting rid of half of their volunteer infrastructure. So there's more than one example of business leaders going into nonprofits and saying, oh, you got to do it. You got to run this place like a business, and completely screwing it up. Right. Yeah. So I also don't want to be so simplistic to say that business leadership will figure it all out. The way to stay true to your values, the way to ensure that you are walking it like you talk it, it's well known, and like everything else, it's simple and hard to do. You have to be transparent and you have to be accountable, right? You have to be completely clear on what your activities are, right? One of our clients calls it walking around in their financial underpants, right? So here's our budget, here's our everything. You can see everything that we're doing. We're just, we're wide open, and being accountable, right? How do you know whether you're winning or losing in a real simple way that's clear? So it's natural for teams of people, again, this is a very human impulse, to take things once you get comfortable with something and have new incentives come in and distort or pervert the mission. How do you prevent that? Well, again, be very clear about your outcomes and your current status and what success looks like and where you are onto that journey. Stay fixed on that goal. Don't change the goal. Don't move the goalposts, right? And be clear and accountable on what progress you're making. And very few organizations have the courage to be transparent and accountable like that. And we find that this is an incredible competitive advantage because so many organizations are fearful about speaking truth about the challenges that they're having. Running an organization, bad things are going to happen. You're going to make mistakes, but everyone wants to put this, as you said, marketing sheen. Oh, everything's going great. Look at us. Look at our stories of impact. Look at our stock report. Everything's going great. And I call it a pretty door to a dirty room, right? It's all this marketing BS. And then when you get inside, you feel it's high turnover. People are frustrated. The leadership's embezzling, Doesn't matter what kind of organization, that garbage goes on all the time. The best organizations are the ones that are truly transparent about the challenges they face and their performance, and they're accountable, and they bring people together and they do something about it, right? And in the age of information overload, you have to have very powerful tools and very good technology to capture all that information and share it with people and get actionable insights about how you improve. And it all comes down into a concept that was developed back in the late 90s by a scholar, Robert Norton, who wrote an article called The Balanced Scorecard. And this has been published in the Harvard Business Review. I think it was first published in 1998. Oh, you need to have a scorecard. How are we doing? Let's look at the scorecard. You can make a scorecard that's really complex and hard to read and ambiguous, right? So it's not only do you need a scorecard, but it needs to be simple, clear, powerful, and compelling. So the devil's in the details about how to do it right. So we found when organizations who pursue our methodology, if they can get to the scorecard phase, and not all of them do, they get to the money phase and they go, oh, we're good, we got some money. And we don't want to do that accountability stuff. That's too uncomfortable, right? Some clients who really know that, if you don't want to be a pop and drop, if you want to report back to your investors, your partners, your government supporters, your corporate volunteers, you want to report to your board of trustees, you want to report to your employees how you're doing, you've got to be clear, concise, concrete, and compelling scorecard that says, here's our vision. And it's not some wishy-washy, feel-good vision of an empowering future that no one can measure, right? It's you set SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timed, right? You apply this discipline methodology. You go through the discomfort of not making progress like Janice did at Treehouse. This is hard. We haven't done this before. If someone else would figure it out, we'd be doing their stuff. And that are willing to sit with that discomfort and deal with bad news and feed that back in, have the tenacity. If you have those personal characters, those qualities, that integrity and that mission focus, then you can create a scorecard. And if you follow that scorecard and you invest in that scorecard, and that scorecard then improves your plan, as the book's process, it's a cycle. You assess your benchmarks, you align your team, you write a plan, you test the team, you fund it, you execute it, you have leadership in the middle, but then you're going to go back to the plan because as you execute, stuff's going to go wrong. You're going to screw it up, and you need to use your the data, the performance data you collect to fix your plan, inform your strategy, do the next round of funding. If you're willing to sit with that cycle and have that immediate investment for that long-term payoff and understand that it's going to take 6, 9, 12, 18 months before we show progress, right? And you're not going to get whipsawed by some philanthropist. Where's my impact report, right? Some government agency going, where's the progress? We gave you $1 million 6 months ago. If you can handle all those pressures, if you can get your team aligned around, then it works. Then that's what keeps you on mission, is having a good scorecard that you invest in. And that's, again, it's hard. I used to say this was easy. Boy, do I not say that anymore.
What do you do? Like, in even though you are in a position where maybe some people that are beginning their startup, or I think that this next question will apply to almost anybody. And I know that you referred to Tolstoy, and you obviously have some phenomenal quotes from MLK and so many awesome leaders in the book and stuff there. What do you do when everything around you looks like it's crumbling? When you put your heart and your soul into the relationships and you realize it didn't work, it's not going to work. Like, what do you do? Like, I think all of us find ourselves at times, if we're being honest and we're growing and we're trying, we find ourselves in these positions where it looks like everything is crashing, and you start asking, why that we, what? You get there. What do you do, man? In your position, like, is there something? What do you turn to?
Well, the first thing I did was have a breakdown.
Yes, I'm not applauding that, but I'm thankful to hear that. Like, thank you.
Oh, you're kidding me?
Right.
I'll tell you more about my own story.
Yeah.
Right? When I describe my process of going through and having the stuff fail, so put yourself in, think. So I have this proven potential to scale up programs to help millions of people. Like, I did this toxic certification that took electronic waste from getting flooded into China and Africa, lowest income people that were getting cancer from picking chips out of. We created a certification process that moved huge pieces of the industry. We'd created all this good stuff So I knew I had this power to help, right? Not some messianic jerk, but I'm like, wow, I can really help people. I'm living my best life. I can go into any nonprofit and I can help them. I can help them raise millions of dollars and design programs and then I go into these nonprofits, and because of my own mistakes, it failed. I failed to give them the tools because I was at fault and I didn't know why. The trauma, the mental trauma that I experienced from that failure was profound. And I didn't know what sort of stress I was putting on myself. And I took that burden onto my shoulders. How come I'm failing? I knew I could have helped that adoption agency scale, but they said they wanted to end my engagement. I'm like, oh my God, I could see the impact right ahead of them, and I blew it up. So imagine years of that. And I'm not failing all the time, but I'm just, every time I'd fail to help an organization, I'd realize the cost opportunity. And after a while, I broke down. Yeah. I woke up one morning to an intense bout of vertigo. The world was spinning. I had vertigo and kidney stones at the same time, like two of the most painful, horrible things. I was throwing up violently. I couldn't walk. And I'm like, what's happening to me? And I was in my mid 40s at the time. And it's about 10 years ago. And I'm like, oh my God. And I went to and I was missing meetings. I was working with a major blood bank at the time, and I was getting my butt kicked in that engagement, right? Yep. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? And I thank God I ran into this balance specialist because I thought I had these little things in my ear, right, that are causing vertigo. Because I don't ever get vertigo, by the way. And all you people out there with vertigo, I feel your pain. It's terrible. I had a childhood fear of throwing up on amusement park rides, and this is 100 times worse. And I could not function. And the balance specialist says there's nothing wrong with your ears, but you're a stress case and your brain is blue screening, right? And I'm like, because he asked me, how do you deal with stress? I'm like, I love stress. Let's go for it. Eat stress for breakfast. And he's like, dude, you keep this up, you're going to have a stroke. So I'm like, okay, I better change my lifestyle. And I got to figure out how to deal with all of this failure. And it's not about just figuring out intellectually what to do different. I realized that being a CEO or being a consultant, you have to be, you're every bit the professional athlete. You have to undergo complete mind and body and spiritual training and emotional and intellectual training. So I thought it was some sort of intellectual exercise. No, it was a physical. So I changed my diet. I got rid of processed foods. I got rid of alcohol. I got rid of all bad habits. Not that I had many. I underwent an incredible transformational experience with Vipassana meditation, where I went to monk school and didn't talk, or I meditated 8 hours a day in a Vipassana training course. Extremely difficult. I fasted. I did a 10-day fast. I literally became a monk. And adopted these ancient practices to clear the trauma out of my head. And then I started on a continuous exercise routine. So of all the difficult things it had to do and all the failure and trauma, you just have to say it's going to cause problems unless you deal with it, right? Error is, and I had to drain myself of the emotional failure. Right? It's not, what I'm trying to do is hard. And if I fail with a client, I just got to learn from that and not internalize the cost of my own failure and let it stress me out. I have to go, wow, okay, what do I do next time? Yep. So that experience 10 years ago, the fasting, the meditation, the diet and the exercise, I'm taking magnesium. There's all these little tips and tricks out there. In the realization that if I'm a CEO of my own company and I'm going to be counseling other CEOs, I have to train just like a professional athlete. I have to be constantly in training and having mind and body integration. That's what's enabled me to keep going. Thank God vertigo hasn't come back. I've been relatively healthy and I'm able to sustain it. I went back and did a Vipassana refresher. Talk about something that is incredibly powerful, but not for everyone, is Vipassana meditation. Same thing with I'm a big fan of fasting, but those are some one of the things that enabled me to process my own trauma?
I think it's we've spoken a little bit about awareness and dimensions and integrity and business. But one thing I see that's aligned more so with the nonprofits and individuals is sort of this return to spirituality, and not like religious spirituality, like you have to have a prayer circle at work, but a belief in something bigger than yourself. And it seems to me like the CEO of Treehouse is like the people that we're drawn to, or maybe that I'm drawn to, when I get goosebumps like now, it's like this person that has an idea that is bigger than themselves. It's contagious. It radiates its own faith in some way. And when you start talking about fasting, when you start talking about these Vipassana meditations, or some people are turning to microdosing these days, or this ritualistic approach, like that scares prophets. Like that scares the business world. Like, ooh, these guys are. How do you manage what you don't measure? This is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. But it seems to me some of the best leaders in the world have had this sort of spiritualistic practice. And in my opinion, I think if the business world were to adopt more of that, I think it would be a better world. But I'm curious to get your idea on the relationship between spiritual nature, however we, loosely defined, and the business world.
Well, it's about, it comes down to what's the meaning of life, right? And I believe that the meaning of life is, having something bigger than yourself and serving others before yourself. This is why, it took me many years to come up with a name for my company. Altruism. Altruism is the same in 36 languages. I think it's the same in Finnish, right? People understand, and you go through all the world's religions and philosophies, and at root of that basic thing is love for other people, right? And that's what animates us. We know that this is the most powerful force in the world, right? But we have to operationalize it, right? Yeah. So we know that this is good. How do we build it in? And that's the great challenge before us. How do we build finance capitalism so it actually benefits everybody and doesn't extract? So it doesn't prioritize one group of people over another. And this is our higher calling. We've evolved from a group of primates that is status conscious and fundamentally violence oriented, right? And status oriented. And we don't hesitate to kill other people to gain status and gain resources. That's our animal inheritance. And to me, the great challenge of human history is using our higher selves to overcome that difficult inheritance and recognize that we have to transcend our animal natures and adopt this, really understand what's driving us so we can adopt a place that's sustainable and equitable. That is altruism. And boy, but the devil's in the details. How do you operationalize that? The nonprofit community was formed to embody this, right? Some, the cynics among us will say, compartmentalize that stuff and keep it off to the side as window dressing, right? Yep. Or that's where we, live our oppressive Puritan values while we, rape and pillage in the for-profit space. But again, I come back to my earlier statement. I believe that we're making progress. I believe Martin Luther King, when he says the long arc of history bends towards justice. When you're drowning in clickbait media, we have media companies that are preying on our lower natures. And if it bleeds, it leads. And it's about social status on the social media platforms. It's about, immediate gratification. It's about, who's getting the most clicks. When we're caught in these status games and we're dividing people into red and blue and poor and rich and black and white, we're succumbing to our lower natures. We're succumbing to our animal instincts. The happiest people, the most successful people, the most influential people, I believe, and I think history backs us up, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, don't succumb to their lower natures. They find greater purpose in helping others. And there's many examples. We have the whole rise of the social enterprise movement, right? Yeah. Wonderful example of to bring it back to earth, a guy named Ned founded a company, 15 years ago to replace kerosene lights in the global south with solar lighting. And he saved tens of millions of lives and built $100 million company, right? It doesn't have to pick between profit and helping other people. That's the core of a social enterprise. So we have to figure out a world where the nonprofit and the for-profit sectors come together. That, you know, but these concepts have been around. It's called quadruple bottom line thinking. You know, it's the whole point of ESG. These concepts are already here. I'm not saying anything new. We know we can engineer a world where we don't have to give anything up. We can create a utopia. We're fighting against, you know, there's a very small segment of the population. You know, out of every 100 people, you're going to have 1 or 2 that are sociopath, narcissists, that are going to burn everything down for their own good. And they're really smart people, and they know how to manipulate human behavior to get their own ends. They're terrible people. They're born that way. It's their neurological writing. They're not I don't believe in good and evil. I believe we follow our neurology and whatever traumas we've inherited, right? We're products of our DNA and our environment. You know, you're not inherently a bad person, but you traumatize a kid who's wired for, you know, to be a sociopath, and you put him as a CEO of a company, and you're going to have problems. Okay. So it's not an easy battle, but if we can somehow get people into leadership positions that aren't sociopathic, we can get people into government that aren't, you know, thinking about themselves, that are truly mission oriented. If we can protect and preserve democracy and keep improving them, there's big battles to fight. You know, and we think about that stuff all the time. And, you know, if you're going to be effective, you know, pick your battles, focus on something that we think you can solve. Focus on one thing that you think you can, you know, really have value in. Don't get caught up into the big, you know, don't, as I tell our nonprofit, don't boil the ocean. It's not going to work. Oceans are already on their way to boiling. You need to pick something that you can solve right now and stay focused on that. And if we can all like pick the one little thing that we can do to activate our altruism, we'll be living the, you know, the principles put forth by John Wesley, the founder of the Wesleyan Church. Do as much good as you can for all the people you can and all the time you have before you, right? Principles of utilitarianism, founded by John Stuart Mill. I mean, these philosophies and these means of fixing our problems have all been before us. I think our challenge today is that we're so drowning. The internet and social media is giving so much power to the sociopaths and the narcissists you can use the power of communication to bring our attention to our animal selves. How do we get people to activate their altruism? And you know, I think that's the challenge. And I think most of us are good. And I remain optimistic. I think, you know, I think we're partially screwed right now with climate change. A lot of these effects are irreversible. It's gonna cause problems. I've got 2 kids. You know, next 10 or 15 years are going to be really nasty, and it's going to cause a serious problem. But the good news is we're making progress, right? We're transitioning away, you know, and the same thing can be said for social justice. The same thing can be said for poverty, for equality. If we don't look at the negatives happening now, we take that broader view and stay focused on, you know, helping others than ourselves. That's all you can do. Otherwise, you go nuts. Otherwise, it's a terribly tragic place. You have to be fundamentally optimistic.
Yeah, I agree. It brings up an interesting point about like demographics. And I'm wondering if we look at the way in which, you know, the self-selecting rise as to the CEO benefited a sort of narcissistic persona. Is that dwindling on some level? When I look at the leaders around the world, like I see like almost like the boomer class, and in some level, if I get philosophical about it, it seems to me like what we're seeing, and I think it's backed up a little bit by the book called The Fourth Turning, but they speak about this idea. If we look at humanity as an individual, as a person, a large part of us is dying, and perhaps these unrealized dreams of a class of people knocking on the door to the next phase is what's creating all this chaos. Like, we're still living in these systems, and you look at the kids today that are like, I want to do something more meaningful. I'm not even going to work. I'm just going to quiet quit over here because I don't even want to be part of that. You know, like, do you think there's a sort of demographics playing out on a bigger scale, and we're in this sort of transition phase?
Oh, sure. I think we always have been, and I'm a an amateur historian at best, and I wouldn't even call myself a historian, but if the reading I've done, it's like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We've been going through these transitions forever.
Yeah.
But it's not linear. We go through these epics of rapid change. And I think one we can look back at very clearly is like the U.S. experience in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And, the McNamara fallacy, Robert McNamara, kill more and we'll solve the problem. Here was a guy using data and business principles to try to defeat a peaceful agrarian society because of this imaginary threat of communism. It was nothing altruistic about it. It was a power mad freak who exported 50,000 dead Americans to waste a lot of money. And with that type of upheaval that created, he created an entire generation, the boomers, the Vietnam era. He kicked off a wave of liberal reaction to that. And many of those people became permanently progressive, and they're still leading our progressive. They became university professors. You want to know why the professorate is so left? Because they're all grew up in the Vietnam era. They have tenure, right? So we can see how these negative historical upheavals have created long-term consequences. And that's you look at Martin Luther King, we're still living in Dr. King's legacy, and it's not linear. It comes back, and all it took was this unholy murder to happen in Minnesota for a wave of social protests. So, I mean, that the whole Black Lives Matter is an incredibly important reaction to that. So yeah, these are more for sociologists and historians to track. But in terms of where we are now, the one realization that I make is people aren't going to change until it's lighting their own rear end on fire. Right? We're in for years and years and years. It's like the scientific data. So one thing we think about all the time is climate change here at Altruist. We're working on climate bonds initiatives. We've done some of the most high scale work on reforestation. My partner and colleague is a sustainability. We're actively in the front lines of trying to fight climate change and keep to the 1.5 degrees, which we already blew past, by the way. What is that? To go back to your question, what's going to get us momentum? And yeah, it's the kids growing up with the fact that they're not going to have a world like ours to inherit, that the people in front of them, the older people, are like, yep, we're setting the world on fire and we don't care, which is basically our reaction. So I hope that they get angry, and I hope that they we don't need a bloody revolution. We need smart people with new solutions. We can fix our system. We can decarbonize our economy. I'm a big proponent of a managed transition, but that fear and that unhappiness at the current state of affairs is influencing the whole generation. Thank goodness, right? They're paying attention. But here's the disturbing part of this. People really don't change their short-term thinking unless there's short-term motivation, right? So we're still wired for immediate short-term, immediate gratification. We know this. We want to do the easy. We want to follow our biases and get our immediate gratification because that's how we're wired. 4.5 billion years of evolution, however, 250,000 years, whatever the evolutionary pathway. We're not going to change that overnight. So the scary thing is climate adaptation involves making long-term investments and for things where the payoff isn't clear. So I hope that the incoming generation is ready that understands we need to make long-term painful sacrifices to ensure that future generations aren't living on a burnt cinder of a planet, right? To ensure that we actually have an ecosystem. I hope there's that anger. I'm seeing it with the young people I talk to, and I'm seeing it in all of our clients. And we want to see the trauma of what's happening translate into action. as it did with the Vietnam generation, right? And other social movements, as it did with the, as the Black Lives Matter is turning trauma into social progress.
Yeah.
Those climate kids, I've got a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old as kids, and I've
Congratulations.
I'm scared to death for those guys, right? I'm 55. I'm going to start, the science really is not going to start biting us in the butt. Your average middle class, American, someone in the global north, the people in Bangladesh are the ones that are going to get flooded first. The people in the African subcontinent, the people who are already on the verge of poverty are going to hear it first. And they're already experiencing these problems. When the climate crisis starts biting into the comfort level of most people, that's when I think we'll rapidly change, right? The problem is by then it's going to be too late to head off the big crises and the worst of it, because I don't really think we're going to see, it's going to be an intellectual problem. It's going to be this vague scientific thing that's out there for a little while. We're really not going to see the pain and suffering of day to day that'll motivate people to take the radical actions necessary. I'm going to take a wild, uninformed, uneducated guess and say it's going to take another 10 or 15 years. So I hope and pray that the generation coming up fearing this stuff, just like I grew up fearing the Cold War, like the Holocaust as a kid of the Reagan administration, right? I grew up fearing the Soviets. And, today's kids are growing up fearing ecological collapse. I hope they can channel that in a good way and fix our systems. Because again, there's plenty of nonprofits out there. There's plenty of climate change specialists that know exactly what the transition needs to be made, but there's too many people who are enjoying entrenched resources and they're threatened. They want theirs and they don't care about the health of others or they disagree or obfuscate. So let's hope the kids come up and fix this place. So that's what we need. I think that's our grand challenge. Yeah. And that along with, so you can't get that if it's a fundamentally unequal society and, some kids are already coming up traumatized and repressed. They're not going to be able to solve that challenge. So we got our work cut out for us, George.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, but I think books like Scaling Altruism, they're a playbook that speak to the ideas of change, because it is taking people that may be born into a sector that has poverty or has trauma or even generational trauma on a level that most people may not know. And that gives those individuals the tools they need to construct a better life for themselves, for their relationships, for themselves, the people they love, and the planet that they're in. And it's, I know we're coming close on time, but I wanted to switch back to the idea of the accelerator for a moment. When you bring someone into the accelerator, or you bring in, or you go in and if you do like a fractional job with someone and you come into this company, are you looking for certain traits in a leader? And if so, what are those?
Wrote them down in the book. There's 6. So again, there's 6 personal qualities that you have to bring to this work, that if you don't have them, if you're missing one of them, it won't work. And if you don't have them or don't believe you can develop them, don't even bother beginning. First one is courage. Risk tolerance. You've got to be in a place where you can be courageous. You've got to have resiliency, right? You've got to understand that if you do something courageous, you're going to run into problems, and you better be resilient. And closely related with that resiliency is optimism. You have to, first of all, go back to that growth mindset. You have to believe you can. You have to believe you can make a difference. You have to have the courage to give it a try. You have to have resilience to understand that you're going to fail a lot. Then you have to have the urgency to move quickly. You have to have the focus to be really specific about what you do and what you don't do, and then you have to have the discipline to actually execute. And it took many years to boil down And that's what we look for in our clients. And that's why I start that in the introduction. This book is not for everyone. The Accelerator is not for everyone because this is a hard journey. Doesn't mean people without these qualities are bad, right? Everyone's got their own gift they can get into the world. But if you want to be a leader who's going to try something difficult in social change, which is another order of magnitude, right?
Right.
Optimistic, courageous, resilient, urgent, focused, disciplined behavior. Those are the 6 that we believe makes the right leader for this. And I think if I had to add a 7th, it would be humility.
Right.
Jim Collins, in his book, the first book that distilled the most attempts to create a roadmap for companies to follow. It's very abstract and it leans on just principles and very hard to operationalize any of Jim Collins's principles. But he talks about the level 5 leader, often humble, intensely focused on the mission. What does that leadership quality look like? There's a huge literature on the leadership, but we try to boil it down to just those practices. That's what this is for. Yeah. And what we've seen again is these leaders are everywhere. You don't know where. Right now, the leadership programs tend to draw from a wealthy white male audience for leadership. You look at the population of Harvard Business School or Stanford Business. All these people are wealthy getting into these programs because you have to have the resources. They make lip service to financial aid, but take Harvard, 3/4 of its students are for the upper 5% of society, right? These are they're teaching leadership to the children of the wealthy. And what I've seen in my work is that leaders are everywhere. And when I did an accelerator program that involved leaders from Vietnam, from Indonesia, from Honduras, from Brazil, from Uganda, and from Kenya, we ran an accelerator cohort for nonprofits that were trying to bring coffee farmers out of poverty. And they needed to adopt the principles in scaling altruism. They needed to learn financial modeling. They needed to learn impact and growth strategy. They needed to learn how to write a business plan, how to run a pipeline, how to create a scorecard. They needed to learn KPIs and leading and lagging metrics. These are folks that English was like their 3rd language. They had no formal business training whatsoever. And there was an incredibly diverse group. And it was one of the most powerful professional experiences in my life. We brought this group together for a week of intensive exercise, and they all picked it up. I've never seen a group of these most diverse individuals learn these alien concepts from a native English speaker who was using idiom phrases. Like I kept talking about spiking the football, and they're like, "What's a football?" Right? And I kept talking about dancing in the end zone, and I'm like, "Oh, I forgot the fact that you guys didn't grow up watching Buffalo Bills lose Super Bowl." Right? And it totally impressed me how smart and how engaging these people are. And they're so far out of the business and management ecosystem and the talent development channels of our business schools and all our current social impact programs. So that's what the book is ultimately about, is getting the playbook into anybody who wants it. How do we democratize access to the tools that work? And that's what the accelerator is for. With a minimal amount of money, how can we run a very high quality program that speaks to these leaders and gives them the long-term community and support along with the toolkit and process? And we're building the accelerator not to just train people, we're building teachers. My friend and mentor is a wonderful social impact leader. He's the former head of global philanthropy at Microsoft. His name, and he's a distinguished professor of social impact at the University of Washington. His name is Akhtar Badshaw. And he wrote a book called Purpose Mindset, which touches upon our earlier conversation about how Microsoft uses purpose and social impact to animate its incredibly diverse workforce. Another very good example. Microsoft really does a good job with its integrating social mission into its work. Anyhow, Akhtar has taught me many things. And he said, don't try to scale up, try to create a movement, right? How do we create a movement, right? That's what enabled, like AA is a movement. It's a religion.
Yeah.
They don't use any business principles. It's all volunteer driven. It's completely decentralized, right? That's a movement, right? The Black Lives Matter is a movement. Me Too, great. There's a movement. Tremendous forces for social change. How do we create a movement of social impact leaders who are using the most powerful tools, who aren't succumbing to the myths and the constraints of the nonprofit sector, who have access to high-performing people and adequate capital? That's what the accelerator is about. I'll continue to work one-on-one with clients. I'm working with one of the most high-impact nonprofits I've ever seen today. They started in 2018. In 2023, they've transformed the lives of over 1 million people. You'll hear about them. They're called the Round Glass Foundation. Incredible organization, founded by an incredibly successful business entrepreneur, Sunny Singh, and he knows how to drive organizational growth. And now he's doing it with a social enterprise, a wellness app that you can download on your phone, and he's driving incredible transformation on health, equity, sustainability, and prosperity for very poor, marginalized communities in the Punjab area of India. And he's creating a model for the entire international development organizations to follow. This is a guy that's actually solving problems at scale, and he's doing it rapidly. Never seen anything like it, right? The accelerator is about, hey, you want it? This is possible. Now come on and join this community and work with people, have access to people who actually aren't struggling, who aren't, stressed out. So many nonprofit leaders are doing their best, and they're stressed. They're suffering. They're can't pay staff. A recent survey by the National Council of Nonprofits, like half nonprofits have waiting lists for their services, and they have 30-40% gaps in their staffing. The nonprofit community is really hurting right now. The number of individuals donating to nonprofits has gone from 3/4 to half. It's plummeting over the last decade. My friend Nathan Chappelle wrote a book called The Generosity Crisis around that. We got all sorts of challenges in the nonprofit sector. So it's time to create a movement. And that's what I'm attempting to do. It's got to be good. It's got to work. It's got to be low cost. It's got to be supportive. It's got to be scalable. And the book's the first step. Yeah. But the book is like a instruction manual to an F1 car. If you haven't driven a race car before, you can't just read the book and apply the principles. You're going to need some help. So we're going to have to land the book, get the community support. I'll probably start with a group of 50 to 100 people. It'll launch this summer. Hopefully one day it can be large enough to really start solving problems at scale.
Yeah, I would recommend anybody that's within earshot of this podcast today, if you found a little bit of this interesting, we just barely scratched the surface. The book is called Scaling Altruism. And it's a phenomenal book. I highly recommend everybody check it out. Is it out in all the bookstores right now?
Yeah, all you have to do is Google it. And the other thing is we have a sign up going on right now, altruistaccelerator.org. So Altruist, ALTRUIST, accelerator, all one word, .org. That's the sign up page for the accelerator launch this June or July. So people who read the book and who want to apply the principles, there's tools, templates, guides, real world examples, and we're going to have a supportive community. We'll do weekly events. We'll have expert guest speakers. I'm going to be deeply involved in the community as well as the colleagues at my firm. We're going to bring in social impact experts. It's super low cost. It's run by my nonprofit that I founded, right? We're going to be charging people $79 a month to keep the lights on at the nonprofit and to fuel the, bring in guest speakers and things like that. So instead of having to, pay tens of thousands of dollars a month for a fancy management consultant, you can get everything that a proven professional's learned, and you can be a community of peers. And here's the thing. I didn't really become a good writer until I became an English teacher. I didn't really learn grammar and the rules of composition until I taught middle school grammar, right? And I learned the power of the phrase, if you really want to learn something well, teach it. You can read something, you'll get 5% of it. If you do something, you'll get like 50% of it. If you teach it to other people, you really become, that's how you get mastery. So the accelerator, I want to create a movement of social impact teachers. So you come on the platform, it's not about learning, it's about teaching other people too. You learn something, you apply it to your own organization, you critique and support and positively, shape the principles and practices of all the other people on the platform. And we're going to have a badging system. It's almost like a certification program. It's not going to be anything that sounds that clunky, but we're going to really recognize the people who learn and have that ability to help others. Hey, I've learned how to write a business plan. I've given other people advice, and now I really have this skill. And that person becomes incredibly powerful, right? So that's how we're going to scale up our impact. We're going to create teachers who know this methodology and who have the impulse to share it with other people. We're going to have a platform where we train those people, and they can go out into the world and say, hey, this stuff works. Why don't you try it like this? That's ultimately the aim. And so I'm trying to live my friend Akhtar's advice of don't try to scale up an organization. I've tried that already, done work for what I'm doing. This is the pathway for us. We're going to try and create a movement of very powerful social impact leaders who are using a toolkit that works.
Yeah, I can see the wave forming and making its way towards the shore and moving it up. So you talked a little bit about where altruistaccelerator.org. But before I let you go, where else can people find you, and what do you got coming up? You have some of the talks coming up, or is there a different set of websites people can look at if they're interested in other parts of the system? Or
well, it's everything that I know and learned, I put it in one place.
Okay.
And I put it in the book.
Okay.
And when I say it took me 5 years and hundreds of drafts and multiple teams, everything's in the book. It's got a glossary. It's got a list of additional resources. I'm trying to keep it simple. I don't want to give people a complicated ecosystem. I want to say, here's the right place. Here's tools that can work. My email is in the book. Email me, right? Donald@altruistpartners.com. You can send me a note if you don't agree with anything you've written or you have some ideas. So I want to be transparent, accountable to people. I'm writing up another success story. We did this incredible intervention with My Green Labs, which is decarbonizing scientific workplaces. They're scaling up around the world. We're adding success stories. I'm incredibly happy. I'm diving in with both feet with this incredible team at the Round Glass Foundation to really create the leading edge model for international development in low resource countries. So I'm continuing to do hands-on work with a small number with my team of clients doing cool stuff. But what's next is just building up this bigger community and just trying to, how do I scale up my own impact? I want to go from suffering and being traumatized at my own failures, right, to actually doing something that hopefully works. We'll see. Early indications are good, but that's what's next. And I'm going to be very focused on that. I'm not going to do multiple things. I'm going to help have the highest impact that I can, both with individual clients and then with this community of social impact leaders. And that's all I'm going to be doing.
Well, they say that the best predictor of future behavior is past relevant behavior. And I can't see anything but incredible success coming forward. It's such a phenomenal idea. Everyone should go and check out the book. Donald, hang on briefly afterwards. I still want to talk to you briefly, but to everyone who hung out with us today, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. Go down, check out the book, Scaling Altruism. Send an email to Donald Summers. Learn, live, and create the best version of yourself. The tools are right there for everybody. We live in a fascinating time. I hope everybody has a beautiful day, and that's all we got. Aloha.